No, we can't stay away. We
can't.
just can't stay away.
Mm-mm.
Hey, man.
Hey, pal.
Hey, listeners. Well, I was going to wait for them to respond, but they're not here right now. That's weird.
Mm-hmm.
Look, I know last week we said, this is it. This is our Christmas special.
Mm-hmm.
We're done for the year, but we just can't stay away.
Yep.
And so we wanted to put together a little something special for you guys this year to kind of have underneath your tree waiting on.
Yeah, a little Latin loopy-loo.
We wanted to kind of go over, well, some of our favorite episodes over the past couple of years that, either we've kind of wanted to revisit, maybe talk a little bit about, or just kind of bring it to your attention if you're brand new to our show.
Yes.
If you have heard this episode before, then I hope that you enjoy it. Again, if this is your first time hearing us talk about this topic, then I hope you enjoy it as well. And be sure, no matter what, to stick around until the end, because throughout the episode, and especially at the end, we're going to be kind of going over our general thoughts, as well as anything that we have in terms of updates. So this first one that we chose, I mean, guys, I'm pretty sure I mentioned this every single show. I love time travel stories.
Yeah.
I also love a good sort of love story. There's something about this one that the moment I found out about it, I don't know, I dove deep. I remember, Tyler, and you'll remember as you listen to it, you didn't really know much about it. You hadn't really heard anything about it. And so it's fun to listen back to this one, because as I'm telling you this story and you, the listener, Tyler's just learning about it the first time. And so his reactions are real and exciting and all that. So this is one of my favorite shows that we've done.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this episode was interesting because, I think I'd heard of the name of Dienach, but I knew nothing about it at all. And so it really was like I also love time travel, and especially with this one, because it feels very much like, that kind of like 60s, 70s sort of science fiction, Isaac Asimov. It feels very like, getting a glimpse into like that kind of future, So I think, this was a great one.
Well, let's not waste any more time, folks. I hope you enjoy this, and that is the story of Paul Amadeus Dienach. In 1924, Paul Amadeus Dienach, a German language teacher living in Greece, became gravely ill. Dying of tuberculosis, he wanted to return home to his country of origin, Switzerland. But before he left, he gave hundreds of pages of his own handwritten notes to his favorite language student, Georgios Papahatsis. Dienach thought translating his notes would help Papahatsis in his study of the German language. They said goodbye and never saw each other again. Papahatsis began to translate the pages. As he did, he wasn't sure if he was reading the greatest novel he'd ever laid his eyes on, or the rantings of a lunatic. There were whole passages about a coming nuclear war, colonizing Mars, and a global government. Sections about flying vehicles, holographic technology, and even contact with alien life. Papahatsis thought that it had to be a science fiction novel. But as more and more of the text was revealed as he translated it, Papahatsis was shocked at what he discovered. This wasn't a novel at all. This was actually Dienach's personal diary. Dienach wrote about how he went into a coma and woke up 2,000 years in the future. According to the words written in these pages, Paul Amadeus Dienach had experienced some kind of time slip that caused him to fall asleep in the year 1921 and wake up in the year 3906. He spent an entire year in the future. Everything that he saw, felt, and heard was written down. This is his story.
Hey, all you clairvoyants and time travelers, welcome back to your favorite podcast, That Would Be Rad, the podcast that majors in 80s and 90s nostalgia, comic culture, all things paranormal, and minors in retro video games, tabletop RPGs, pre-internet mysteries, and raising our kids to be half as cool as we were back in the 80s. I'm your host, Tyler Bentz, and this is your other host,
Woody Brown.
Hey, dude.
Dude, I can hardly even just hold it in any longer. I've been so excited about bringing this story not only to our listeners, but to you. And anybody that's listening to the show, or anybody that has listened to the show this long, should know something, that I'm not really the greatest at like keeping surprises and to myself.
Well, if you're not the greatest, I'm even worse.
Well, you're definitely the worst, especially at spoiling TV shows, movies, books, endings, whatever. But ever since I stumbled across this story, I just knew that it was something that we had to talk about, man. It's got all of the elements of everything that I love, and on the surface seems like one thing, but then as we're all going to kind of come to find out, it's a lot more complex than I even initially thought. So
Yeah, and I real quick, sorry.
okay. Oh,
Listen, this is going to be a very Woody heavy show because you've got the reins.
yeah, I made you like not look anything up. So
Yeah, exactly. I do have to say the like several sentences you've mentioned, you've told me about. I'm in for a treat because I'm the one that's showing you stuff. So I'm pretty psyched today because I have never heard of this story. And I was thinking, well, since I've never heard of it, maybe it's just like a little one-off kind of deal. And so I started looking in a similar area, and we got like 5 more show ideas. So
yeah.
It's going to be awesome. Let's get in.
All right, man. Let's dive straight in, folks. Now, so I think it's important. Let's talk a little bit about who this Paul Amadeus Dienach was. All right, let's give some historical context. So Paul Amadeus Dienach was born in Zurich, Switzerland in 1884. Ever since he was like a little kid, he'd always dreamt of being a teacher, an educator. It's like what his passion was from birth. And so that's what he went to school for. And after finishing, his studies, getting his degrees, he became a teacher of German and French language. So in 1917, Dienach fell ill with this disease that, crazy enough, kind of sounds slightly familiar, but I had never heard of it actually. And it's called encephalitis lethargica. It's more commonly known as the sleeping illness. Now, between the years of 1916 and 1924, there was a little bit of an epidemic around Europe with this disease. And basically, the symptoms of it were anybody that got the disease would fall into coma for different periods of time, sometimes long, sometimes short. And, sometimes the people would wake up and sometimes they never would. Wow. So pretty scary.
So would you have to, and I'm not going to do this the whole time, but
know what the cure was, but apparently there was one, or maybe there wasn't. I didn't research that part.
Man, new song. Press pause.
There
Let's lay this thing down. So they just kind of like,
it wasn't like
unconscious, but
yeah,
they just
so it wasn't like
to.
narcolepsy. It was more like they would be like
in a coma?
symptomatically like super lethargic, really, really sleepy, had difficulty like communicating with other people sometimes. I said the word communicating weird. So they would be super tired. People, hey, Paul, you look a little sleepy. Go lay down. And then they would just be out for, and again, it varied in terms of length. Okay. Sometimes it would just be a few minutes. Other times it would be for days on end. And one thing that he did know and remembered was that whenever he was out because of this, or sleeping, I guess, he could never remember having any dreams at all, which is pretty interesting.
And when you're saying like Sleep. You mean like actually sleeping?
Can't wake him up. Yeah, dude, a coma.
Or in like a coma almost?
In a coma. Wow. Yeah, just like they appear to be normally sleeping, but they also just don't wake up. Very scary. So in his youth, Paul fell in love with a girl in his village named Anna. They had met in school and stuff, and their families were kind of, friendly toward one another, and so they knew of each other. And essentially, it was kind of a little bit of like a Romeo and Juliet situation, though, because although Anna felt the same way about Dienach, her father wanted her to marry somebody else. So they kind of kept their love for each other secret, and they would kind of meet in a special location within this local park that their families would often go to when they were much younger. Only Anna's best friend, Amelia, knew of their love.
My daughter's name.
My wife's name's Anne. Your daughter's name's Amelia. There's all kinds of synchronicity in this thing. Just wait.
Wait a minute, real quick. And again, I'm sorry to interrupt. Sorry.
No.
Can you please tell them, just take us 5 seconds to tell them
dude,
about the crazy synchronicity?
Are you talking about like the old newspaper thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We paused this discussion of Paul Amadeus Dienach for just a second. So the other day I discovered this website that you can go to kind of look up old newspaper archives starting in 1800 to now all around the world. So tons and tons of old newspaper archives, digitally copied and uploaded into the internet. You can search by word or even names or cities. So, just like, I guess the first time there was ever a search engine, I was like, I don't know what to look up. How about Woody Brown? I type in Woody Brown and I hit enter. And the craziest thing happened in the search results from a newspaper in, what was it, like 1854, something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
In an Australian newspaper.
Again, with the Australia.
Yeah, no. Australian newspaper, there was a wedding announcement for a man named Woody Brown marrying a girl named Elizabeth Ann Brown. Now, my wife's name is Ann, but what you don't know is her name is Ann Elizabeth Brown. Forget about synchronicity. Forget about just how crazy that is. Let's just talk odds, okay? Let's just talk, if you were a gambling man, what would the odds be that you would ever find another Woody Brown and Ann Brown anywhere?
Almost impossible, I would say.
So in other words, I'm pretty sure I found a newspaper article about when me and Ann went time traveling. So
like that, yeah.
Actually, I'm glad you brought that up because there could be some
there
could be some connective tissue here between
parallels,
some parallels between that and what we're going to talk about today.
Ooh, okay, good.
Anyway,
see, I did it on purpose.
So yeah, I know, man. It's just okay. So back to Dienach and Anna, his love. So only Anna's best friend Amelia knew about this kind of these star-crossed lovers, we'll call them. And in his journal, which I have a copy of, by the way, Dienach says, quote, "Nobody knew about our love back then. No one except her best friend, Amelia. I had not even told my mother, my own best friend, my hero. How much has she been through herself with my misfortunes and my sickness?" And then in the next entry, December 4th, 1918. "Our secret happiness lasted several months. I did not recall what season it was. Did other people talk about us? I don't recall that either. The only thing I do recall is you. My every future plan, my every thought, my every hope was formed by you. Then I was offered the position at that school. I took it as a good sign and was quite happy since I was financially independent and was able to see her every 3 months. Then another year passed. Her mother died. I had finally saved some money to start my life with her. She used to write to me saying she was very sad. I assumed that her mother's recent death was the reason. I was mistaken." So, a local man, essentially, while Dienach is off, he's got this teaching job now. And this is before he moves to Greece, like you heard in the intro.
Well, he said his health, though, like his mom.
Yeah, so because of the sleeping illness, right? had started back in 1917.
Oh,
This
it
is like a
started
year
back then,
later.
okay.
Yeah, so this is like a year later, and he's writing in this first journal.
And is it like kind of intermittent, like it comes on and then goes kind of thing?
The sleeping illness, you
Yeah.
never know when it's gonna strike, essentially.
Jeez.
So he's got this teaching job that's kind of close by. It's not in their village, but it's more in the metropolitan area. And he's like saving up. He's getting proud because he's going to be able to, provide for Anna and hopefully their family and stuff. Because he knows that like that to her father, it matters that whoever she marries is able to financially provide for them, right?
Like my father-in-law.
And not too dissimilar to a lot of father-in-laws, right? So essentially, a local man had befriended Anna's father and kind of really over-exaggerated his financial situation and asked for Anna's hand in marriage. Dienach kind of hears a rumor of this, and of course it completely breaks his heart. And so he goes back home and meets with Anna.
Falls back asleep.
No, he meets with Anna. They're just standing there. He just falls to the ground sleeping. She's like, what does this guy think I'm supposed to do here? Waiting. Okay, so they meet at that secret location in that park. Specifically, it was this hill that was always filled with like these blossoming, what he called wind flowers, which are kind of like buttercups. And
What the hell is a buttercup?
Buttercup? Like it's a type of flower. It's like a white flower. You never heard of a buttercup?
No. I mean, I've heard of like a peanut butter cup.
I love butter stuff. Buttercup. Dang it. Butternut. Cup.
Dude, I'm sure you would remember what a buttercup is if you just took a second to try the magic mind.
That makes no sense at all.
What do you mean?
That was the worst possible connective tissue to get into a Magic Mind ad I've ever heard.
Well, I don't know. Okay,
Although, you know what? I actually appreciate
I kind of like that stuff. Dude.
I like the weird, like ridiculous leanings of, into your ad. So yeah, continue.
Speaking of buttercups, bro, I think you would kind of be able to recall your botany knowledge if instead of drinking all those dadgum energy drinks, you chose to instead enjoy one of these little bottles of Magic Mind, bro.
Let's see what
The thing about Magic Mind that I love so much is I don't feel like I'm just jamming a bunch of chemicals into my body. I don't feel like, I just don't feel like my, liver and kidneys are just going to get punched whenever I chug this stuff.
Okay.
What's cool is I start my day with this stuff. And because of that, I'm not joking, dude. My 5 a.m. walking and running goes a lot easier. When I get home, I feel the same amount of energy. I don't feel any ups and downs. I'm focused. I'm productive. All in all, I'm super stoked, as I'm sure you will be once it gets here. This episode is sponsored by them. And listener, don't worry. You too, you can enjoy the benefits that this little stuff will bring to you.
I can't wait.
It's the perfect size for like a stocking stuffer or something. Hey, just, maybe it's a little hint to your spouse that, you just want them to feel more productive for the day. If you go to magicmind.com/berad, you can use our special discount code to get up to 56% off of your first subscription. And that special code is BRAD20. Again, BRAD20. Okay. Well, while they're there, she convinces him that there's no way she's going to let her parents force her to marry this dude. And I'm going to quote another entry in his journal. It says, "For the rest of my life, no matter how long that will be, the memory of her that night, the last time I ever saw her, standing in front of me, will always be fresh and vivid in my mind. She wasn't sad. On the contrary, she was full of optimism. She was laughing. I couldn't stop gazing at her. We were on our hill. I pressed my lips against her hair. Around us, only blossoming windflowers. Enough for today," she said. "Let's go back. I have to be home early. Next time we're here, I'll make a wreath of windflowers. Will you place it on my head?" At that point, he agreed to. He asked her, "Promise me that I will see you again, that they're not going to bend you." She answers with, "We will come here again. I swear to you that we'll come back." Now, she ends up marrying the man. internally tortured, of course, but doing so to please her family. It happened kind of right after her mom passed away, actually. And Dienach thinks that part of the reason that she agreed to it was to, maybe her dad sort of used that as a means to be like, this would make your mom happy.
Yeah.
That kind of thing, to see you married and all that. But this is something that tormented him forever. And it was something that he noted that he was constantly praying for signs of Anna's eternal love for him, because how could she marry this guy? Well, 2 years after the wedding, she died. In May of 1921, Dienach's illness began to worsen. And in fact, he ends up being hospitalized. He started getting this terrible high fever and kind of is beginning to come in and out of consciousness. Through his fever-induced kind of blurry vision, he remembers seeing different men and women gathering around him in the hospital, but he was way too weak to communicate with them. When he finally regains consciousness, he notices something strange. His hospital room is different. The medical staff that are kind of coming in and out are dressed in unfamiliar clothing. And he notices that they're speaking a strange language, a language that he can't understand or recognize, really. But being both a student and teacher of languages, he was able to recognize a few words here and there that resembled both Swedish and English. So at this point, he tries to communicate, but no one can understand him at all. And they kind of just give him these weird sort of puzzling looks. One of the older physicians, however, recognizes some of Dienach's words and, using some broken German, tells Dienach that his name is actually Andreas Northam. Obviously, Dienach's like, what? The doctor proceeds to tell him that he is this renowned physics professor who had a terrible accident. Dienach terrifyingly explains that he doesn't know who this Andreas Northam is. He doesn't know anything what this guy's talking about. He begins to try to explain to the doctor that there must be some sort of misunderstanding. Obviously, he's just hysterical. The doctor calls a nurse over, who brings over a mirror, turns it towards Dienach. And as Dienach peers into the mirror, he's looking back at a reflection of a complete stranger.
Oh my gosh.
He doesn't even recognize his own reflection, dude.
I mean, is this reverse reincarnation?
I'm telling you, man, this is, and I'm just going to say this here, folks. We're going to talk about some really crazy stuff today. This is literally the craziest thing I've come across in a long time, and it's going to be close to impossible for me to really go through everything that he details. But I'm going to do my best. I kind of summarized a good fair amount of it. But okay, so obviously, dude, if that happened to you or I or anyone listening right now, if you looked into the mirror right this second and it was just somebody else there, it would be like your mind could not comprehend that, right? It would just wouldn't be able to figure out what the heck was going on. So same things kind of happen in Dienach here. He goes into this state of shock and panic. He becomes visibly upset. He's crying hysterically. He thinks at this point that he must have died. Maybe this is heaven, or worse, that he's just gone completely insane. Between, the hysterical sobs and panic, he cries out that he's just a simple language teacher from Switzerland, not this physicist, and he doesn't know what in the world has happened to him. The doctors in the room seem to have some sort of reaction when he says the word Switzerland. It's like they kind of look at each other they recognize that. Someone asks him, what year is it? Dienach kind of looks up and says, it's 1921. The entire room goes silent. After a few quick seconds and some kind of shared glances with the other doctors, the older physician steps forward and tells Dienach that the year is actually 3906.
Wow.
Yeah. Dienach, of course, still isn't buying it, you know? I mean, again, if you put yourself in this guy's shoes, it's kind of like, okay, like when's Ashton Kutcher popping his head in to say that I'm on punked? You know, when's that happening?
Oh, I thought you were referencing Butterfly Effect.
No. Around this time when he's just kind of sitting there in disbelief, the doctors are sort of just trying to comfort him and really honestly trying to keep this patient from just going ballistic. Mm-hmm. They, one of the fellow physicians or orderlies or nurses or whatever decides to let some light in to the room. So she opens the blinds. When that happens, he can see out of this giant window, and he sees these buildings that reach through the clouds. Listen to this, dude. Vehicles that are somehow defying the laws of gravity and zooming past the window. This becomes way too much for him to mentally handle, and he just blacks out.
Falls back asleep, yeah.
Hey, man, can the guy just stay awake for a minute? No. So he just blacks out. Dienach's then observed by the doctors for the next 3 days, eventually kind of recovering enough to walk around and sort of communicate a little bit. He's still kind of like keeping to himself and just sort of trying to make ends of all this. He, in the journal, describes these walls made of crystal that give you a panoramic view of the city or landscape surrounding this hospital. Objects that are made of this pastel-colored glowing metal that are warm to the touch. Still...
I mean, is he talking about like computers or like a monitor?
I mean, that's what it kind of sounds like to me.
On the first one, yeah.
Yeah, like these walls made of crystal. I think of like flat screen televisions.
Yeah, right.
I'm thinking of...
Or touch screen.
Yeah,
even.
touch screen stuff. You know, computers that are kind of warm to the touch. Eventually, you know, again, he's still kind of staying pretty quiet. Eventually, he's led the physician that he, or that could understand him, leads him to this large room where he meets two older men that are dressed in these long white robes. At first, he kind of thinks that these are some sort of like priests or religious figures, or maybe even some kind of like royalty or high government people. Again, he's kind of drawing from his own knowledge base, kind of like we talk about on this show, where, you know, when people see or experience any kind of interaction with, you know, quote unquote, well, anything outside of their normal time or world, whether that is a cryptid creature or potentially
the other, as Timothy Renner would say.
Yeah, just something else, creature or alien or whatever it is, they tend to kind of do so through the lens that their mind will allow, right? So that's his first thought, like, oh, okay, well, I guess they're taking me into church or something. And he comes to learn that these are actually called electors with an I. He learns that they're kind of like elder wise men. Up until this moment, the physicians that had been kind of observing him, other than, you know, the one that was kind of communicating with him the most, didn't really believe that he was really from the past. They just thought this Andreas Northam guy had suffered, you know, some real intense brain trauma in the accident that had brought him into the hospital. You know what I mean? After questioning and speaking with Dienach for a while, the electors actually began to believe his story and everything that he was telling them. Because, and this is when it starts to get real juicy, they have this knowledge of a rare phenomenon that they called a consciousness shift, where someone's mind or soul could be transported into someone else's body. Based on their conversation with Dienach, this is what they believed kind of happened here. All right, listen to this. This is crazy. When Andreas Northam was in this accident, he was clinically dead for 15 minutes. So doctors had dropped the temperature of his brain, and then they were able to restart his heart. And the electors believed it was that moment specifically when the personality or life swap occurred.
Wow.
The mind of Paul Amadeus Dienach was now transferred into the body of Andreas Northam, almost 2,000 years into the future.
I mean, that maybe that's how you do time travel. You just, your consciousness kind of just like shoots forward into the future or past, and it just sort of takes on a new body.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because just like you, Dienach was kind of intrigued by this
A
idea.
genius.
But he but he like presses the electors for a little bit more info on like, okay, that's a cool idea, but how does that work, right?
Yeah.
So they explained to him that time isn't linear and that everyone's consciousness exists all the time and everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And although it's a rare phenomenon, it's something that has been known to happen, again, just not very frequently, but it can happen just,
Well, it's good to know that science finally catches up with us.
Yeah, exactly. Now, at this point, a man named Stefan is summoned by the electors. Stefan was a very close friend of the real Andreas Northam. And so the electors theorized that Stefan would be one of the only people that would truly know, like, the dude's true identity, besides the few physicians in the hospital who'd been able to understand Dienach. And their idea, essentially, is that if Stefan can help Andreas regain his memories from that 3906 existence, that the personality shift could in fact be reversed, which would cause Dienach to be sent back to his time, body, and existence. So like the idea being that like, if all of a sudden I wake up one morning and I'm just like, ah, and everybody's like, what's going on? And I'm like, no, I'm not this Woody Brown guy. They would be like, okay,
This
call
dude
Tyler.
sucks.
Call Tyler, have him come over. And then every day he's going to teach this whoever is driving Woody's body right now, he's going to teach him about the past, with the idea being that maybe unlocking that memory will then kind of make everything right. And here's something that's like really neat. One of the first thing that Stefan notices is not only are mannerisms different and stuff. Of course, he still looks like his friend, but he like the way that he does certain things are completely different. His handwriting is completely different.
That's weird.
Yeah. Stefan does agree to kind of come visit every day to teach Dienach about modern society.
Was that a plug for our old band?
No. But Dienach, here's the thing. I'd be super interested in like, oh yeah, cool. Like definitely teach me about how all this technology works and tell me about these cars that are flying around and all that. But also, just like Dienach, I would be extremely interested in what happened in the past. Because again, you got to put yourself in Dienach's shoes. Everyone that he ever knew is not only just, this isn't 100 years in the future or even 1,000. This is 2,000 years later.
Yeah. I mean, that's like you being born at the time of Jesus and then suddenly
Now it's
and now you're here
2022.
now. Yeah.
And someone just says, hey man, catch me up.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, like, think about that, right? Now, here's another quick thing, real quick, before we start diving into what he finds out. Even though the physicians kind of understood what they were dealing with in terms of like this psychic personality shift and all that, there's still something that kind of like left them puzzled. Even though Dienach had been living in this future for a full 2 weeks, dude, he never once slept. He would stay awake throughout the night, spending his time learning the new language, reading as much as he could in books, even sometimes just staring out the window and just watching life in this new future, right? But he never grew tired and never actually fell asleep. He did spend a lot of time using this thing that he called a Regenschwager.
The heck is that?
Dude, listen to this, bro. He describes it as a handheld device with moving three-dimensional images that glow in the dark with sound, music, and even narration.
Dude.
The guy is holding an iPhone. Now, keep in mind, for everybody that's just like super skeptical about this, there's a couple things we need to kind of remember. This is a journal that was written in the 1920s. And if you don't believe that, and we'll get to that later, that it was given to this Papahatsis, at the very least, Papahatsis, who we'll talk about later and why he would be a trusted individual, translated it through the 14 years after he received it. This is still well before, Apple.
Oh, yeah.
Just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page here real quick.
I mean, what if Steve Jobs read this?
I know, man.
And then that was like the grandfather paradox or the bootstrap paradox that gave him the inspiration to be like, oh wow, let's put a TV in our phone.
Man. I mean, it's funny that you say that because the doctors were very encouraging for Dienach to kind of learn about the past and study everything that he wanted to, except for they would not let him look up or learn anything about the 20th century. Essentially, dude, they didn't want him to pull like a Biff Tannen in Back to the Future Part 2 and kind of learn something and then use that knowledge to either attempt or to actually change something in his past if and when he was able to return.
Wait, so you're saying that like the officials or the doctors or whatever, they started to like sort of believe this? Like, it could be a possibility?
Oh, yeah, dude. They totally believed it.
Wow.
Because
I worked at a hospital and I heard some pretty crazy stuff.
Yeah. Now, let me kind of reframe that answer. So the electors, the, elder wise men, knew of this phenomenon being, happening. Not all the time. It was super rare. But so they believed that it was Dienach's consciousness in this Andreas Northam's body, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they did keep it a secret. Besides the physician that kind of, there's only two other physicians that knew of sort of, quote unquote, the truth here. Mm-hmm. Everybody else just thought it was Andreas Northam, okay? And they kept it a secret. Initially at Dienach's request, but come to find out, there was an organization that was kind of like central to the world's learning and stuff at this point in time called the Valley of Roses. We'll kind of talk about them later, but...
Man, that sounds amazing.
Yeah. So to answer your question, some of the people believed that this was real. Other people just didn't know, right? And so under the guise of, hey, maybe him relearning history and kind of spending time with his friend, maybe he'll kind of like regain his memory. So essentially, everyone just thought this guy had amnesia. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying?
But I mean, I guess what I'm asking is like, why, by the way, there's a train going by right now, but why were they so adamant about him not looking back into, you're saying they wouldn't let him look back or they wouldn't let him look into like...
Yeah, no, they wouldn't let him look back into the 20th century where he came from, right? So all of the info that he would look up had to start in the year 2000.
But is that... But is that like so because they thought that there could be a possibility that he would shift back?
I know. They just thought that if he did learn anything in the 20th century, most specifically, those instructions were, given to him by the elders or whatever, the electors, because they didn't want him to potentially change anything and ruin anything, I guess, whenever he got back to his time. I thought time was not linear or whatever, but anyhow.
Yeah.
So here are the events as remembered by Paul Dienach. So again, these are the events that Dienach wrote in his journal that Papahatsis translated. Okay, so this is what happens on Earth over the next 2,000 years. But again, this is sort of like his sense of quote-unquote time we're talking about. Don't write these dates in your calendar with a Sharpie just yet.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
America's future can be determined by our dreams and our visions.
It was very intense, bright light.
For over 200 years, there have been reports of giant man-like creatures.
From another dimension, another world, I don't know.
The most intriguing mystery on the North American continent.
Hey, this is Bryce Johnson from the Bigfoot Collectors Club, and you're listening to Tyler and Woody on That Would Be Rad, because that is rad.
All right, man. So again, folks, this is, extremely compacted, summarized of some of the stuff that happened. It's very, very the broad stroke version because literally you wouldn't believe the amount of detail. I haven't had the chance to read all 375 pages of this guy's journal, but this is kind of like the highlights, the abridged version. This is the this is the Cliff's Notes. Okay.
Yeah, the fun size version.
Yeah, it goes into so much more depth. It's extremely intriguing. I cannot wait to read the entire thing because truthfully, it sounds amazing. All right.
Yeah, I agree.
So between the year 2000 and 2300, this is really when humanity kind of has some of the biggest struggles. Although it begins to solve like issues such as like overpopulation, ecological destruction, famine, tyranny, regional conflict, and also has a bunch of interesting discoveries scientifically, like interactions of electromagnetic energies, new technology that deals with like the usage of gravity and even spiritual energy, anti-gravity, all this kind of stuff. They're still just kind of having a tough time. Mars is actually colonized in the year 2204. And over 60 years, the population of Mars grows to be about 20 million people. But tragically, they are all destroyed in 2265 by some sort of massive natural disaster on Mars. And the goal of future Mars colonization is then just completely abandoned.
They really shrewded it.
Yeah, they really shrewded it. And again, I'm just going to kind of like blow through some of these here. So in 2309, a major world war erupts after this medium-scale nuclear war. And it has widespread destruction across the globe. And it lasts for nearly 80 years, wiping out the vast majority of the human population. But humanity survives, and a world government called a Rechtsstaat is established in 2396 to try to prevent such disasters in the future. This actually ends the quote-unquote ancient period of history that he's studying and kind of marks the beginning of what they consider in 3906, the beginning of, quote, modern history. So beginning in 2400, this one world government is formed, but it's led by wealthy, powerful individuals, which was still super corrupt. Countries around the world still have like strong nationalism. And so for about 200 years, there's a strong resistance globally against this one world government.
Good.
Eventually, though, citizens stopped electing politicians and businessmen, and instead, the higher offices around the world were held by mostly scientists, engineers, philosophers, and humanitarians.
Oh, boy.
Over the next 300 years, society starts to reform. In 2823, this world leader named Torhild proposes a new economic system that is based on what he calls global adequacy. At this point in history, people collectively start working for all of humanity together, the greater good. They work initially for 40 years of your life in your chosen field, and then after that, you retire, and essentially all the sort of material needs are met sort of by the global community. Now, this is what's crazy. As time goes on, technology and automation progress so much that by the time Paul Dienach wakes up in 3906, people work only for 2 years of their life. They're educated throughout their childhood, and then at the age of 17, they enter into the workforce.
They had to give up was all their freedom.
No, listen, they work very hard for 2 years, and then they retire. That's it. Because all of their material needs are met: food, education, shelter, clothing, even things like entertainment. They don't have to work anymore to make a living. They don't have to worry about like, man, I really want to be this, like an artist, but like I can't because I have to pay the bills, right? really, in fact, money as we kind of know it isn't really used anymore. Instead, almost all the value is placed on art and the pursuit of knowledge. People that are super passionate about what they do and the careers that they can, people like, what ends up happening is the people in careers that continue to work past these 2 years, and I'll get to that in just a second, are extremely passionate about what they do. So, for example, Andreas Northam was a physicist. The physicians that took care of this guy in that hospital, some of them were like the older guys. You can absolutely pursue like a lifelong career in any field, but you don't have to. Again, you don't have to just like work a job just to pay the bills, right? And if you wanted to, you could just live life. You could just live this life of leisure as long as you completed your required, hit the mic. As long as you completed your required 2 years. Now, just like you were kind of saying through this whole time, I know exactly what everybody's thinking, listening.
Yeah.
What do you think in this? What would you say? If you could just sum it up in one word, what does this system kind of sound like to you?
Number one, it's kind of like a socialist kind of thing.
There we go.
Or communist type
Okay.
thing.
It's mainly socialism because, and again, because we have promised ourselves, but also you listener, to always and forever keep this podcast. There's plenty of stuff if you want to go listen to political debates and stuff that exist out there. That's what, hold on now.
Okay.
But here's the thing. I will say, so in other words, listener, don't get upset. I'm not trying to debate anything with you, and either is Tyler. We're not going to debate with each other, but we can say, I think, we can all agree, historically.
Never works.
And why not? That's what I was going to say. Historically, that concept doesn't work, and why not?
Well, because we are flawed as human beings, and
Thank
it's a
you.
very
You see what I'm
idealistic.
saying? Like, I don't even tell you anything about the episode. I should have been a lawyer.
Yeah. Well,
Dude, you're right on the money, but let me just stop you right there
Okay.
because I don't want it to go to look. We're
Well,
flawed.
can I
Go
say
ahead.
one thing though?
Yeah.
And it's not even about communism or socialism, which I do disagree with because we
Yes.
are flawed human beings.
Yep.
However, to me, the bigger thing almost would be, there's going to be people like you or I who, Woody and I are a type of people that, like, we've never been, not one time in our entire friendship, and we've been friends for years and years and years, like best friends. Not one time have we ever called and said, "Hey man, come over, let's like hang out and watch TV or have a beer or just chill out." Not one single time. Every single time it's, "Hey man, come over, let's get some songwriting done. Hey man, come over, let's have a vision meeting and talk about like what we're going to do with the podcast for the next year," which we still have to do. We're extremely motivated to a fault, really. But the problem is you're going to have those people, and then you're going to have the other, I'll be generous, 70% who it's just kind of like laziness. And you see a lot of that in like younger kids. And I mean, I know I come off as like the old guy yelling, "Get off my lawn." But I think that's what would happen. I can't see, I think humans are at their absolute best when they are like pushed, and especially when they're passionate about something and they're like creating, or they're like, that's where we as humans get like our sense of like worth and like well-being, and it's because of like, the old saying, like, by the sweat of your brow. Like, I think a lot of that is like sort of needed as to function as the way we were created to be created.
And to kind of like expand on that real quick before we get into human nature and that discussion, like, I think that in every industry, there are people that are extremely passionate about what they're doing, and it's amazing. And we've all run across that person. And it doesn't even matter if we're talking about something scientific or whatever. It could literally be the person that's like the manager of the Quick Trip. I mean,
and I've
just
met
like
some
take
real
so much pride in what they do, and you're like, man, when you run across that person in a different industry, dude, it just feels amazing, right?
Yeah.
But okay, going back to what you're saying, human nature is part of the reason why a lot of things don't work, because there's always going to be someone who wants more. whether that's more things, a bigger house than the neighbor, more VHS tapes on their shelves, more power, more authority, right?
And want to work less.
Although 2 years sounds pretty odd. So how could a system like this actually be working in 3906? Why didn't human nature get in the way? Well, by that time, my friends, we're not human anymore. Okay. Now,
like transhumanism?
Well, here's the thing. And see, if you listen to this, do you understand what I'm talking about? There's so much to this, dude. There is so much. It's so interesting to me. No, basically, by 3906, we're not human like we think of human today. The human race has evolved. Paul Dienach describes this phenomenon that started happening to people around the year 3000 called the Nebelwerk. In the future.
So is he just giving these names? He's
just writing these names down, man, in his journal. He's describing, and I'm not talking, like, this seems detailed probably. Maybe.
But I mean, there was also a weird, like a bizarre name for like the iPad or the phone. Are these just sort of names that, it's weird that he wouldn't be calling them what they're actually...
Dude, that is what they're actually called, because he's now learned a new language. You understand? You know what I'm saying? Like, it'd be like, imagine, like you using your example earlier, you're born during the
Great Reset.
No, no, it's now like around the time of Jesus, and it's like 33 AD, and then all of a sudden you go into a coma and you wake up and it's 2022.
Yes.
And all you know is how to speak. Hold on. All you know is, let's say, Arabic or whatever. Okay. And then now you got to use your words to name an iPad. Are you going to use your words?
Yeah.
Or are you going to say it's called an iPad?
Well, that's what I'm asking. It seems odd to me that he wouldn't. I mean, I understand that like he doesn't speak the language, but it's still weird to me that like, I mean, for example,
I'm just giving the name, dude. He does go into extreme descriptions of all this.
Like the Japanese are really big on this. It'll be like, then it's like Atlanta Braves. Like,
that's what he did.
Sorry, I don't mean to be offensive.
That's what I'm saying. That's what he did.
But why wouldn't it be like, whatever his language is, and then like iPad?
Yeah, that's what it was. It was like whatever his language was. So he had initially written it in.
So this was like his sort of the way like the Japanese, like the slang for would have adapted how we say lighter, and it's like raita.
Yeah,
I'm being dead serious.
Okay, but no, for real. Yes,
but like that's what you're saying. He was doing that. Okay.
Yeah. So it's called Nebelwerk. That is their word for this phenomenon. Okay. Weird. And here's what that phenomenon is. In the future, the human's brain structure evolves, developing a new sensory organ that gives people the ability to perceive a new plane of existence and gives them access to this like vast spiritual knowledge. They call this ability, there's this other word that I'm not even going to try to pronounce, but essentially he calls it supervision. Yes.
Man, that's
bad, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Although I'm sure it was like some sort of 80s TV or something.
What do you mean by 80s TV?
Wasn't there like an Omnivision? Just the way it sounds like something from the 80s.
Yeah, except for this was written far before that.
Yeah,
okay.
You know what I'm saying.
Okay. But thank you very much for interrupting. I know what you're saying, dude. But,
do you though?
Yeah, man, supervision. Okay. Here's ultimately supervision gives people this like new cognitive ability of this like instant enlightenment. It gave them a sense of like incredible happiness, spiritual peace, divine joy, this complete acceptance of life and death, and a disregard for all sort of like earthly things, the importance of like worldly things, right?
So we're like divine beings almost.
Well, we have that divine sort of
like perspective or
exactly
perception
right?
or whatever.
Here's the kicker though, man, and I think you're going to be able to help us out with this one. This euphoric nirvana, this feeling, it came all rushing in at once, initially causing everyone that experiences Nebelwerk to die.
Yeah.
And so although they died with like these like looks of ecstasy and joy like on their face, man, they were so overwhelmed that they just couldn't survive the event. Now, when I was reading about this, I was like, dude, isn't there something biblically like that kind of that's reminiscent of this? Like,
I mean, are you saying like how?
I swear I remember hearing something at some point, and maybe it was just sort of like somebody's sort of interpretation or a cool idea.
Is it kind of along the lines of like how like Moses witnessed God and it like turned his hair and beard white?
That
like
kind of stuff. Yeah, man. Like where if you were to actually see some like heaven, basically, you would be so overwhelmed that you would just.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know if that's in the Bible, but you know what I'm saying?
I think there's some sort of allusions to that. Yeah. Like it's like we view, we see through like the veil darkly. Like we'll never be able to, like it's just too much for our human.
Right. We'd never be able to like mentally comprehend something that like grand, right?
Yeah.
And divine.
Right.
All right. So here's something. Here you get ready for some more synchronicity, folks. Beginning in 3382, on September 6th of that year, that would be my 1926th birthday. And that's the synchronicity. It's on September 6th.
Wow.
A man named Alexis Volkey, not to be confused with Balky from Perfect Strangers, but
Exactly.
Alexis Volkey, who was around 76, experienced the Nebelwerk and survived. Here's what's crazy, man. For some reason, now again, he might kind of go into greater detail within the book. I'm just kind of like trying to get to like the interesting, the sort of highlights or whatever. He survived, and for some reason after that, everyone else that had it also survived the Nebelwerk. And it sparked this like spiritual renaissance. Wow. This switching on of new perception becoming sort of a normal process in everybody's life. And then that's around the time that essentially Homo sapiens then gave way to this new species of human called Homo occidentalis novus, which translates from Latin into New Western Man.
That's cool.
In the future, again, according to this journal, human nature changes, evolving from sort of our more primitive nature that was still heavenly. I mean, if you think about it, dude, so much of our everyday, if you really break it down, so much of our personalities and our quote unquote human nature right now is so heavily reliant on like ancient past things, right? Like survival, fight or flight. I mean, competition,
it's like built in our
success
DNA.
on the biological level, dude, for sure.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And so that ends up being translated into our personalities and society in general and stuff. And it would make this sort of like utopian sort of ideal and vision of the future just something that would be impossible to work today. Because like we said earlier, no matter what, there's always going to be Emperor Palpatine.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
No matter what. It's like everybody can be fine and happy, and then there's going to be somebody that's just like, yeah, like, no, cool. But also, like, I want to live in a mansion.
Yeah. Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But in 3906, for this evolved human, it works. And it starts to, like, work beautifully. In fact, like, in 3906, man, there's, like, almost no laws because they're just obsolete and unnecessary. You're able to comprehend, like, empathy and things that just another level than what we're able to now, you know?
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I mean, still pretty skeptical, but
yeah, well, okay.
It's super cool.
Yeah. So, but again, dude, this is 2,000 years. Now, we can start breaking down like the probability of whether or not our brain is going to, develop another sensory organ and really all the things that would be necessary for that to happen. But let's not do that here.
Yeah.
The interesting part is that you reading through these pages and stuff, like the working quote unquote for the common good as a species, rather than sort of like isolated segments of the human population, became the norm. And like, because they were able to sort of like really just speaking on like survival alone, kind of collectively as like the big village, if you will, survival became more prominent. Like advent of like new technology and medicine and all these kind of things, like death and life, like everything was just like peaking, man. Everybody was doing awesome. Everybody is in this like heightened state of awareness, and like spiritual evolution too is just at a level that, you know, it's just hard for me to comprehend, even reading through these things. And
so basically, like to get sort of new agey, your vibrations have gotten so high that you're kind of like a godly being, or you're like an ascended master.
You cheated, man.
Huh?
You read some of this stuff, man.
Dude, I haven't read any of this. I'm just...
I know, but I mean, it's cool that, and that's part of the reason why I knew if we did it this way, you would kind of unlock some of that thought process, man. Yes and no. So they're not like, they are able to tap into that.
They're like a yogi, or like a...
Dude, they're like Yoda, man.
Well, yeah. Right.
They're able to like sort of like, and truthfully, they're able to like, it's like there's this amazing marriage of like science and theology kind of that happens in that they're even able to like understand and using their technology see things like basically like spiritual existence coming in and out of just like the normal, you know, like let's say like we're in our studio and we're like, oh man, set up the spirit cam, and you'd be able to see like these things just kind of like free sort of moving through your reality and all this kind of stuff.
That's really cool.
Like travel technology is taken to a whole nother level. And again,
are we teleporting yet?
Well, not necessarily teleporting. There is something, hold on, man, let me try to find that. Like, seriously, dude, it gets so in-depth that I was like, oof, I don't really know how deep we want to go into this. But I mean, dude, they talk about, hold on.
I mean, I'm in it. I'm strapped in.
Let's see. Oh, dude, okay. Since you asked, there's this new form of transportation. And again, folks, I know, this is going to sound crazy, but let's all remember, this is potentially 2,000 years from now. Although, I'm going to pose a different theory in a few minutes. So, a new form of transportation they call, or like involving these like field gates, which are essentially portals between the physical and spiritual realms now exist. They figured out how to utilize, I guess, like the vibrations and stuff, kind of like what you were talking about, to be able to travel from one place to another using these portals, bro.
Wow.
Okay.
I mean, did this guy, because, what, 1917 or 1921?
Yeah, 1921.
I mean, the idea of any of this stuff is so, like, foreign. Like, you know, it's one of those things where if, and again, like I know we sort of reference this a lot in this show, is like, you know, we're talking about people that are way far back, and it's like, we're doing that from the perspective of someone who lives in 2022. It's easy to be like, oh, well, that's a natural progression. You know, it's been in sci-fi movies and and you know, in this social, you know, or like cultural zeitgeist or whatever. But like somebody from 1921, this is such a far-fetched, like almost totally abstract for the time to say. So to me, that's where these like little things that are just so outrageous, like these little weird details. Like, again, and I keep going back to Sam the Sandown Clown, but it's like all those bizarre little details seem so weird and abstract to make up.
Right.
That to me, those are the things that like make me think like, oh, maybe there is something more to this.
Right.
You know?
Exactly, man. As I started to read more and more about this, it starts to like create even more questions in my head. Like, okay, now that we're thinking, well, and we'll get there in a second, but like when I think about things like when we talked with Bryce and we're talking about the Bigfoot that like, you know, looks like it just basically walks into a portal and then disappears. When we talk about things like where the footprints in by Timothy Renner and Joshua Cutchin. Yep. It's like it begins to sort of like piece a lot of stuff together, man. And it's like, oh, and I've got an idea of why that might be in a second as well. But anyway, let me keep on going with this because just as crazy as you think it is, boy, we still got room for crazy. All right. So even the concept of being selfish is something that they actually like study as some sort of archaic remnant of this quote unquote less evolved species. It's hard for them to comprehend or even like imagine being selfish,
Right.
which is interesting. And again, these are like observations that he's just like making, right? So truthfully though, and he writes about this, he kind of finds the people of 3906 to be, well, just weird. He says they kind of like walk around and act like just like carefree children. And sometimes it kind of gets on his nerves a little bit because it's just like, you're an adult. Why are you acting like a dang, like, oh,
He's like, also, you need to be working.
Yeah. and he says like, he kind of takes a minute and he's sort of like, in one of his writings, he's talking about how like, well, hold on a second. They're free of any anxiety.
Yeah.
To climb a corporate ladder, or what am I going to be whenever I grow up? Or, man, I've got to do this. I got to, 5 jobs just to do this. And like, even just ending up doing something that's like mindless tasks just so you can like pay for the electricity. Right?
Yeah.
And so instead, it's been like nearly 600 years of this kind of lifestyle, generations after generations and after generations of people that haven't had to think that way. And so he kind of starts this guy, Stefan, who's now...
Surprised you didn't do the Wedding Crashers quote.
What?
5 generations.
Of large family breeding. Like Stefan, who's now like, he's becoming friends with, because he's just kind of gaining all this knowledge throughout this year. He's befriending this Stefan guy, and Dienach kind of says like, he kind of expresses his frustration with this like carefree childlike sort of affect that people have. And Stefan says to him like, hey man, who's to say that all these things you find strange are childish instead of maybe divine?
Right.
And Dienach's like, whoa, man, okay. But Dienach then asks Stefan like, okay, look, that's great. Everybody's living in peace and harmony and all that. But like, how in the world could these 3906 humans, like if we think we have snowflakes now, how can these 3906 humans possibly even survive like an outside threat such as like, I don't know, aliens?
Yeah.
Well, what's funny is like Stefan comes back with, dude, and I love this, man. This story just has a little bit of everything. He says, oh, well, we've actually already been contacted by aliens many, many times, man, without any problems. In fact, humans in the future are like very aware of other intelligent beings living around the solar system and the galaxy. But the interesting thing is Stefan says that, they're not really interested in communicating with us and really kind of prefer to sort of, quote, study us from a distance and observe us from a distance. He says that they've really only intervened with the human race on a few occasions, one of them being when we were on a path toward total human annihilation.
Trying to think, in 1921, what would have been, would H.G. Wells, I guess?
H.G. Wells, and also...
trying to think...
I was going to talk about this a little bit, but what's his name, man? Lovecraft.
Yeah.
Lovecraft would have been kind of around, and we'll kind of talk about that in terms of like, what do we think about this? I was going to bring up Lovecraft, but...
Well, but I'm thinking of like H.G. Wells being like War of the Worlds and like the idea of like...
Right?
See, I don't know. I can't remember. I was just wondering if like that would have been something that... Because this whole time, everything you're saying, I'm thinking like, okay, well, how would a 1921 man like view this? Like, would he have already heard of that? Like the idea of like aliens from outer space or Venusians or
War of the Worlds apparently was first serialized in 1897. So,
wow,
yeah, he would have kind of had that idea. Okay, so the years kind of going by. He's befriending Stefan. He's also not really he's not sequestered really. He's not sequestered to the hospital really. He's able to like walk around, like, you know what I'm saying? Like interact with people. Stefan's now bringing him around. he introduces.
But he's still in the hospital though, right?
I think he's like staying there just kind of in case sort of thing, in case it does work, and it does. But again, only he, Stefan, and the Valley of the Roses, but the elders or whatever, the electors, and a couple of the physicians kind of know that they're doing this. Stefan introduces him to a girl that was Andreas's girlfriend, basically. Mm-hmm. And over time, they actually develop a pretty strong relationship. Her name is Sylvia. And it's interesting, man. Throughout the journal, he's kind of learning about their culture and all this stuff. But there are like entries where he just feels like extremely guilty because she'll say stuff to him like, I've just noticed after your accident, like you just seem like a new person. You've made me kind of want to remember my life and like enjoy life. And, she starts to really kind of like fall truly in love with this guy because of the difference. And so he writes about just feeling so guilty not telling her who he is and the truth. And really doesn't want to scare her off, right?
Yeah.
So one day she says something, and it's this line, dude, that, oh man, let me try. Well, I don't know if it's worth sorting through all these pages to find, but I'll paraphrase. She basically says that she's like, man, I really want to kind of take you around and show you all the places, that I grew up and stuff, because although I can describe them to you, you don't ever really have the full experience unless you go there, because hearing them might make you happy, but seeing them with your eyes will make your soul happy, which I just thought was super, super rad.
That's cool.
Because that just alone is like a really cool, true statement about traveling in general, if you ask me. On one of these trips, so they go on several, okay, and they're using these vehicles that he calls Avigiosa or something like that, which is this flying vehicle that can take you anywhere on Earth almost instantaneously, which, man,
wow,
pretty dang convenient. They go on a couple like different day trips, and she takes him to like, where she grew up and all this kind of thing. Well, he secretly is like, man, I really want to go back to my village in Switzerland. This is getting closer to this year, towards the end of this year. And he's really kind of, throughout this time, he often thinks of Anna.
Yeah.
And in fact, there are some things that, remind him of Anna in Sylvia. But really, I think the fact that he's kind of found a connection with another girl, despite it being, another time and place, really, it just brings back more of those old feelings. And so he really wanted to go back and visit this village. He didn't tell Sylvia. He was just like, hey, I kind of want to go here. She's like, oh, okay. So they spend the day kind of talking and exploring. And eventually, they end up on that same hill that he and Anna used to visit. Interestingly enough, synchronicity, fate, whatever you want to call it, the windflowers were also blooming that day. And as they were talking, Sylvia was kind of like fidgeting and doing something and fiddling with like the flowers all around her. And he didn't really think of, anything of it until he realized that she was making a wreath. And she looked over at him and she said, enough for today. Let's go back. He kind of looks at her like strangely, like he'd just seen a ghost.
Wow.
She hands him the wreath, dude, and asks him to place it on her head. So as he does, he feels like he's just been hit by a bolt of lightning. Everything starts coming rushing back like, holy cow, like we promised. We promised that we'd be here. So he goes back home.
But it's almost like she was like doing all those things that like he promised to do or whatever.
Exactly. Wow. And so that night, he starts to feel his eyes getting heavy. He kind of remembers his last thought being that he loved that feeling, that same feeling of joy that he had with Anna that last time that he saw her. And finally, Andreas Northam fell back asleep. Back in 1922, Paul Dienach awakens from a year-long coma. I mean, it's just fascinating, right, dude?
Yeah, it's awesome, dude.
I mean, so he wakes up during this time that he was asleep in real life in Zurich. Keep in mind, remember, he, because of the encephalitis lethargia or whatever, the encephalitis, the sleeping illness, he's fallen asleep or he's gone into a coma in 1921.
Mm-hmm.
He wakes up like a year later. Now,
Wow.
he wakes up and he finds out that while he was sleeping, his mother had passed away.
Man.
He also now is positive for tuberculosis. If you ask me, it's probably while he was in this hospital, he probably just caught it by breathing in, right? Because of this, again, he wakes up, he doesn't tell anybody about what he experienced for fear that, number one, he's going to lose his opportunity to teach because they're going to be like, don't let this crazy guy in this school. He's not teaching anybody. Number two, maybe even worse, they might just lock him up in a hospital for the rest of his life. And he doesn't want to die of tuberculosis locked up in some mental health institution. So just like our buddy Ed in the Coral Castle, he decides to move somewhere that's going to be more coastal, that's going to give him, a better climate to combat the effects of tuberculosis.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's right. I didn't even think about it.
So he moves to Greece. And this is where he began to teach German and French. And that's where he met who would become his favorite student, Georgios Papahatsis. So in 1924, he really starts to succumb to tuberculosis. He knows he's going to die, man. And so he wants to go back home. I didn't read this anywhere, but I like to think that he wants to go stand on that hill one last time. And Papahatsis kind of thinks, him just like knowing that he was going to die essentially might have been the catalyst that I guess made him decide to give these pages to Papahatsis. So he gives these pages to Papahatsis in the guise of like, hey, this will help you kind of practice translating from German into Greek, and, this will help you. And he's like, oh, yeah, cool, whatever, I think initially Dienach kind of told him that he was going to go, on a little vacation or whatever. He died not too long after that, and Papahatsis never saw him again. So, man, I mean, there's a lot to unpack here, I think. Yeah. We could go into all of the technology and all that kind of stuff, but I think instead, what I kind of want to do is talk a little bit about like what we think about it all.
Yeah.
Before we do them in, I know there's going to be a lot of questions where people say, the skeptical folks, the more skeptical folks, I think will have a couple of questions on the top of their mind. One being, why did it take Papahatsis so long to kind of translate this and get it sort of published? Because the first published version of this, which was actually called The Valley of Roses, was published in the 1970s, I think 72 or something like that. And I'll answer that question now, which is he kind of translated it over the course of 14 years, sort of like on the weekends and stuff. Again, at the very beginning, it just seemed, I'd say the first 20 pages of this diary is really just, well, maybe not even 20 pages. Maybe it's, 10 to 15 pages of these pages would have been his diary about, being young and in love with Anna and, his life at home. So he probably just thought like, okay, what in the world, right? And so this
just like somebody's diary.
Right, exactly. And this is a guy who, by the way, George Papahatsis he studied law. He even got a PhD in law in 1932. God, we'd have him on the show, but sadly he passed away in 1991. Yeah. He was in the Greek military. In 1929, he ended up being accepted into the Council of State and had like some different, positions in the Greek government, and served even as secretary of the Greek administration in 1947. He was a very respectable kind of character. And it kind of goes, I guess, against sort of any of the initial skepticism of, well, this guy just kind of made it all up. I mean, I don't know, man. What questions do you have for me, or like, what are your initial thoughts about it all?
So I mean, I am like pretty much a true believer in all that. And I don't mean I just naturally believe everything and anything I read or hear about. But to me, what that means is I like to entertain everything as the possibility of it being, true or
As stated.
yeah, as stated. Yeah, right. And for this, I would say, again, I kind of go back to those the elements that are maybe a little more sort of fantastical or left of center or sort of abstract, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Those to me are the things that lend credibility, which I think probably to most people, those are the things that, would totally lose them. They're like, you lost me. I'm out. But to me, those are the things that, I don't know, they just seem sort of like if somebody were going to be making these things up, those are the things that would feel like okay, you have a natural progression of like thought of like, oh, well, I'm going to make this up. And this seems futuristic, for somebody living in 1921. This seems like something that would be crazy for the times. But like the abstract things are the things that like a 1921 person thinking of like an iPod or an iPhone or an iPad, like those are things that would never fall into that progression of technology to the mind of somebody living in the 20s.
Yeah.
And like to me, those are the things that like just feel like, I don't know, maybe there was something to it,
Yeah. And like one of the things that I was going to say when we were kind of like in that section of this discussion was like, you and I have always kind of talked about how, especially creative people, but, when I say creative, I also mean like folks that engineer and, software designers and anybody that's actually creating something, right? There's always been some sort of like, idea that, or we've enjoyed the idea that at some level you're sort of tapping into something that is beyond you, right? It's sort of like when you hear, Paul McCartney talk about when he wrote Yesterday, it's like he just woke up and there it was. And it's kind of like sometimes we would write a song and it's just like we just pick up the guitar and start going and the melodies and the words and everything kind of just comes at that moment.
Oh, yeah.
It's something that's hard to explain to people that haven't experienced that. And so like when I start thinking about it, this entire story, I start thinking like less about did it really happen to the guy? More about like, oh, does this explain how someone can have these types of ideas to create something that didn't exist before, right? People who have made incredible leaps in technology and stuff have talked about like, well, I dreamt about this and then I decided to make it.
Right.
Well, when you're dreaming about that, and this kind of goes into, what I've kind of talked about on, I think here and there on other episodes, certainly you and I have talked about this before, in the past, but on the phone or whatever, about this like idea of when you go to sleep and you dream that your consciousness perhaps kind of goes to another plane of existence. Now, again, folks, I know, especially if you are listening and you're like, hey man, can we just talk about the Flintstones? Or, can we just talk about He-Man or whatever? I get it, right? We're talking about some pretty out there concepts, but I've always wondered, dreams and things like that have always captivated me. And we actually have a great sort of listener submitted thing about dreams coming very, very soon. But I just had this, like, that's what this made me feel like, right? And so whenever I started thinking about him talking about all these, well, this hasn't happened yet, is something that you'll find online about this. Like, well, his predictions didn't happen because, this, and this. Well, okay, but what if we're using that sort of idea that time isn't
linear.
Is not linear, and that everyone exists at the same time in all times and everywhere. What if, like 3906 that he experienced was not a 3906 that we would experience?
Well, and also I think, all roads for us, pretty much lead to dimensional travel instead of maybe time travel all the time. But
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of the same thing that is my answer to the debunkers for John Teeter, or like your sort of more, I don't know if it would be like
Nuts
more
and
sort
bolts.
of regular or conventional time time travelers that we know of, but time travelers. But a lot of the debunkers are like, oh, well, this didn't happen, and there wasn't a civil war, and yada yada yada. And it's like, well, if you entertain the possibility of what he's saying, then he successfully got the computer, the IBM, and maybe this chain of events that happened by him going back in time, getting it, and then altering and changing the time, like those things didn't happen.
He's talking about John Teeter right now, listener.
Yeah, John Teeter, episode.
I don't.
You can
season
like
one,
layer in like episode 4. Actually, don't have that.
Give me
but, like,
more work, I guess. Huh?
have like the lady talking.
Season 1, Episode 29, the John Teeter Time Traveler episode.
I guess Woody will do it. This is part of my 2 years. Go ahead.
But like I like that idea, and then I also like the idea of, well, maybe who's to say that his consciousness was sort of moved forward into like the other body of the person in 3906? Who's to say that body wasn't residing in another dimension?
Yeah, exactly.
Where a few little things happened, and it completely changed that timeline of that particular line of dimension, or or that sort of multiverse.
Man, oddly enough, in the John Teeter episode, I remember talking about how, like, one of the things that I think John Teeter kind of said was that, like, there's, multiple dimensions based on all these different choices, and it's easy to go into another one. It's hard to come back from the one you originated in.
Right.
And so, like, now I'm thinking, like, oh, man, did Dienach go into one that was close enough, but in that one, it's like, oh man, he wakes up, his mom's dead, and you know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah. Oh, you mean like when he went back?
Yeah, when he went back.
Yeah.
And then also, like, I also imagine this whole time, like, although he was, asleep the whole time, I just imagine like this Andreas guy waking up and being like, and so he goes back to 3906 and chronicles this whole entire other thing, that maybe he jumped into.
Yeah, that was my question too. I'm glad you brought that up, because I totally would have forgot. But yeah, did they just like sort of swap, or I mean, we really could have a whole episode into like the possibilities and some of these things that like we're fascinated with like, I think it could tie into the same thing as like remote viewing or lucid dreaming or astral projection, or like all these, even down to like reincarnation is like, is that what's happening? Is somebody just sort of like entering this other, like this consciousness kind of like floating around? Is it the same thing that happens with, when people talk about reincarnation? And maybe this time maybe he entered that like state, or when he, his like sleeping illness or whatever, maybe he was presented the light, even though he wasn't technically dead, and he entered, and then instead of him being born into like a new baby, being born, he just sort of like jumped into this other body that was already sort of living in the time of 3906. Like,
Or
you could go so many different.
Yeah, it's like a glitch. It's a glitch in the Matrix, and and if this is the first episode that you've ever heard of our show, boy, I bet you're real kind of like, man, last week it was Batman.
Right, yeah,
and this week we're talking about jumping into other bodies. This is, hey guys, welcome. Dude, can I just talk real quick? Because another thing that I was so curious about is like, oh man, now opens like this whole other world of interest in what do people experience when they're in a coma. Has anybody ever experienced anything like this? Dude, I came across this article written by an author named Caroline, I'm going to butcher her last name. I think it's Leavitt. She has a bunch of like, just top-selling books and everything. I really want, I'm going to reach out to her and see if she might come on the show and just explain her experience, because let me just read the title of this article. It says, "In a coma, I dreamed a whole other life. I'm still dreaming it." So to summarize, basically, after the birth of her son, she got really, really sick. She had this mysterious blood clotting disorder, and the doctors couldn't really figure out what was going on, and they kind of panicked, and so they put her into a medically induced coma with memory blockers. I don't know what that is, but
what is that?
I don't know. There's like a little link there too. Let's see. What is memory? Nope, that's not. Okay. Memory blockers. I don't know what we're going to have to ask her what that is. They didn't want her, like, as I'm reading this, dude, I had a weird, like, I feel like I'm in another dimension myself. They didn't want her remembering the pain or any of the procedures. Is that possible, pal?
I mean, maybe it
just
is
talk to me, kind of just a normal conversation here. Am I striking out, man?
No, maybe it is. I'm trying to think, because I worked in the operating room.
Starting to get real dizzy, man.
Well, and I would be around like all the anesthesia techs and stuff, and like anesthetists and a lot of S's. I don't know that it.
I don't know. I don't know what that is. Maybe but. Long and short of it is, she says that, scientists are still kind of like trying to figure out what happens when coma patients are in a coma. Like, do they dream? Do they feel, see? Some people report that they do, some people don't. Some scientists believe that they actually, dream and all that. She says that she doesn't know if she dreamed, but she remembers that when she woke up, she felt like someone had pulled her violently from one world to another, as if like, even that she had stepped from one room to another. She started to talk to her husband and friends about this, like, living in this, like, sort of imaginary town, and it was just amazing. There was all these, like, stores, and she had all these intricate details. They kind of, she said, sort of nodded supportively. And, as she was talking, the doctors would kind of come in and just be like, you're on a lot of, intense medications. And they just kind of, like, reassured the family that, she's just kind of essentially high.
She'll come out of it.
Yeah, exactly. She'll come out of it whenever the drugs get weaned. She'll kind of start having that. Except,
speaking of weaned, did you ever get into that band?
I think so, a little bit.
They were super weird.
She says that, like, even though they promised her they would, kind of stop happening, they didn't, and she kept on dreaming about it. And she would even sort of like experience different things that were happening in the town in like a real kind of timeline. And every time that, or I think one of the last times that she had dreamed about it, she heard that someone that she had loved in that sort of reality or whatever had died shockingly. She said that she kept on dreaming about it over the years, always the same town, the same people in it, but things would change. She would move out of this house and, yada, yada, yada. So anyways, in this article, she kind of just talks about how, was it a dream? Was it some sort of like, are dreams products of our own sort of emotions and thought process?
Yeah.
I mean, there's just like so much to it, man. So much of this, like sort of all the things that this guy described. And again, as detailed and as long as I talked, it's nothing in comparison to the detail that he goes about everything, dude. I mean, he goes into detail about how these people, like, how their interpersonal relationships work with one another, and just all kinds of observations, man. And one thing we got to keep in mind here that I think is important, this isn't a guy who his ultimate goal was to become like an author. This is just a dude that was, like, as he said, a simple language teacher.
And so this was all like pretty much posthumously too, right? Like,
right, yeah. So like this Papahatsis was never able to kind of ask this guy about any of this. In fact, he even went back to try to find him. And what he found was that Dienach might not have been his real name. See, Dienach kind of grew up in Switzerland during a time when I think he was trying to escape the tyrants in World War I. And so he kind of got out of there and may have changed, his family might have changed their names. And so he couldn't, at the time, his mom had died anyway. So it's like he didn't have anyone anyway. He didn't have any way of looking up family, or he didn't know much about him.
Yeah. In the pre-internet days, folks, we didn't have that luxury.
Yeah.
Man, that's super cool, dude.
I mean, it's just super wild, man. And I just, like I said at the top of the show, the second that I accidentally stumbled upon this, I was like, first, just every little bit sort of intrigued me more and more. First, I thought it was a time travel topic. And I'm like, yes, this is a cool time travel story I've never heard of. Then it was like this amazing sort of love story, which, by the way, we haven't even like touched on yet, that it is just like, and you know, I'm a romantic guy. The fact that like dude, whenever I found that article that we brought up where I saw my name and Anne's name from 1854 or something in Australia, I like immediately took a picture of it and I was like, see, our souls are tethered.
There you go.
Like, you know, the fact that like that is what worked for him to go back to his time, and then like that they ended up in that same place that they would go to just to talk and stuff. I mean, just, man, it's amazing.
Well, one thing that I think is maybe even more fascinating is the idea of like, okay, strap on your simulation theory hat, but like this idea of like he's in the future and the new girl, they travel back to that hill, and it's like she goes through all the steps that his old girl, you know, from back in the day, from the 20s, and then she kind of says and does all the same things. It's like
she feels awakened whenever he finally starts acting that way.
Yeah, it's like, was she...
Well, here's something that I didn't add because I didn't initially intend on this being such a long episode.
Yeah.
In his discussions with, I think, Stefan, they basically kind of determine, this is like right before he kind of goes to bed and finally sleeps and then returns. He basically truly believes that Sylvia is the reincarnation of Anna, and that was part of the reason why his, consciousness was drawn to that time, because hers was already there.
See, that's exactly.
Jeez Louise, dude.
Yeah, that's where I was kind of going to. That's amazing.
How is this not a movie already, man?
Yeah, it really.
I mean, it's over the top. It's kind of crazy. Maybe it's a better book than it is a movie. I don't know.
Or was Sylvia and the new girl, were they just like NPCs in the simulation that were sort of coded to do the same thing at the same place, no matter what time you're in? And those were just kind of like, you know, they're
kind of like that. What would you call that, man? Sort of like in Vanilla Sky. They're like the programs.
Yeah, they're
to
just
help,
programs.
Like, get it back on track.
Or like in Free Guy, you
Come
know.
on, man. I don't like that. It's sad.
No. I'm just saying, like they're basically placed there as guardrails, or like kind of like you. Whenever we play Dungeons and Dragons, you have certain characters that can kind of like be like, whoa, you don't need to go too far over here.
Yeah.
Or you need to make this decision so that your life goes down this similar path. It's like, what if the simulation has these coded beings, you know, set in place, set in like the same location, and like they interact in the same way and speak the same way and say the same things in a similar manner. I mean, that's amazing, man. No matter what time you're in.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of like that idea, but can I admit something here to you and the entire audience? You already know this. I'm so mushy, dude. I'm such a mushy guy.
Such a dork.
I'm such a dork. That like I really do. I mean, truthfully, I love the idea that, and this is going to sound, so many people are going to be like, come on, bro.
Yeah. I can hear them logging off right now.
They're mad at me. All right. No, it's not my, I love the idea that no matter what time in history, no matter what happens, no matter what, somehow, we kind of talked about this before. Yeah, dude, no, like the people that you are tied to so deeply in your life that no matter where you are, you're going to find each other again.
Woody, I brought that up and said that you and
I know that,
and
man.
I got made fun of it.
Well, no, because like I was like we were talking about, it, and then you're like, and then me and you, I was like, whoa, hey, bro.
I'm your mother, bro.
Soulmates, but like no, but I do like that idea, man. Like, Holy crap, hold on. There is a quote that he said. Oh, man, where is it?
What was it?
It was something along the lines of like when you meet someone, love has a way of making it seem like you've known that person as long as you've existed. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've been in a relationship with my wife for 100 years. Which I can say these things because she'll never listen. So
this is because there's so much to this. I invite everyone to try and find this book. You can find it online. Actually, if you're an Amazon user or something, I think they're giving it away free, like the Kindle version.
Wait, I just looked and I couldn't find it.
So that's because you were looking for the wrong thing, and that's why I wanted to kind of make sure everybody was on the same page. So the name of the book that's now been published is called Chronicles From The Future, The Amazing Story of Paul Amadeus Dienach.
Because the original one was The Valley of Roses.
Valley of Roses, right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Did not find that.
And so, again, it's like, 380 pages, extreme detail, but a lot of really interesting concepts that he talks about. And no matter if we can just agree on one thing, it doesn't matter if this guy really experienced that or just dreamt it all up.
Yeah.
It is extremely fascinating. It's brilliant. And it just talks about some amazing things.
Well, I do have one more question before we go. And I can hear our more maybe skeptically minded folks out there saying this. What are the odds of the student just making all this up?
Well, again,
what would be your response to that?
Yeah, he very well could have. It doesn't really fit in line with who he was as a person necessarily. You're talking about a guy who he also wasn't an author. He has a PhD. He, was a military guy, future sort of like statesman. It doesn't really fit in with who he was. Well, I say this. I think that's a great place to start with that skepticism, truly, to try and figure that part out. Like, is this something this Papa Hatsis would have made up, and then just use that as your means of exploring the story a little bit more. I think the more that I've read it and read into sort of the introduction that Papa Hatsis has to the whole thing, it just doesn't make sense, And regardless, it's sort of like there are several different aspects to this entire story that make it incredibly fascinating and certainly worth a read.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you said it. You couldn't have said it better.
I think we've said it all.
Yeah. I think your delivery was expertly done, and I applaud you because that was not an easy topic to get into.
Well, thank you, man.
Access granted.
Dude, as I was listening to that, I almost wanted to break in right in the middle of it and just, alert everyone. But I can't believe I forgot about this. But do you remember when we were doing this episode, when I dropped that knowledge bomb, or before? I think we were getting into the studio and we were about to start recording this, and I had to tell you about that synchronicity that happened with that Australian newspaper from like hundreds of years ago. And the article was when I found that wedding announcement for Woody Brown and Elizabeth Ann Brown.
Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. Mm-hmm.
Re-listening to this, it's like, oh my gosh, I completely forgot about that. So I think our conclusion then, when we first recorded this episode, and even now, is that at some point, Tyler and I have figured out how to time travel.
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure.
And so it's coming, folks. If there's anything you want us to look for while we're over there, just let us know.
And also, I think the best way to time travel, bro, is with Magic Mind.
It's going to boost you. You're going to know where you're going. You're going to know what to do. Well, I don't know if you saw this, but Clay commented on the post. He's like, whoa, did you just drop an ad in there? And then I responded back with, this comment is brought to you by Magic Mind.
Oh, man, that's funny.
We hope you enjoyed this episode from our vault of previous episodes. New season coming up in January. We cannot wait for you to hear what we got cooking.
Woody, where can we be found?
Well, listen, right now, and again, I know we keep on pushing off this announcement, but right now, the best place for you guys to interact with us is on our Instagram page. You can find us at That Would Be Rad. We also have a Facebook page, and you can certainly message us there. We have a couple listeners that have recently submitted some incredible personal experiences that they've had via our Facebook page. But I encourage you, if you want to write it out, we can do it that way, and then Tyler and I can kind of recreate that story that you submit. But if you want to add your voice and be part of the show, literally, you can kind of do it like some of our recent listeners have and submit an audio recording. And the best way to do that would be where, Tyler?
Would be to send it to thatwouldberadpod@gmail.com. And yeah, the more the merrier. Obviously we would love just as well for you to, lay out an essay for us to put together, but I don't know, having your voice on there is kind of cool. It's kind of, you would be part of That Would Be Rad legacy, if you will, and cemented in history, really, of the show. Be sure to tell a friend about the show, if you don't mind. Just tell one friend out there, one coworker, one person at the food bank or your church or wherever, pass it on. Also, you can leave 5-star reviews now on Spotify. Well, I guess you have been able to for a while. But yeah, just give us a 5-star review or two.
It helps us. It helps other people discover us when there are good reviews. And so for everybody that has already left us a 5-star review, thank you so much. And if you haven't already, just take a few seconds.
Yeah. And new listeners, welcome.
Hey, man. Welcome.
Thanks for coming by.
Thank you so much, man. Good to see you.
Well, I guess that's it. So we love you. We appreciate you. And as always,
be rad.
That's the way it goes.
Clouds in a time where I just needed some sunshine. You were already dead, for you became a ghost. You always said our future